All right. Well, I'm going to continue in my series of I was maybe you have a good way of putting it. I'm gonna christen this a series called "What is Platform Engineering," or whatever we used to call it. I don't know if that's a good one. It seems a little too forceful. But to that end, you've worked in this area for many years and helped run and build and be on these teams. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Darran Rice. I'm based near London, in Essex, in England. I joined VMware at the start of this year as part of a team called the Tanzu Value Advisory Team. It's a team that had been sort of quite successful in the US for about 3 or 4 years, back even when we were pivotal. But we decided to expand the function into Maya. I was the first one to join, and now we have 3 members. I know you know them, Brian Ross and Mark Zopner. So we're now at
Yeah,
full strength. And basically, our team is a sort of executive advisory team. We've come from industry, we've sat in these people's shoes, and we can sort of talk through their problems at business level and outcome level. Having seen what to do, what not to do. And we can advise them beyond just sort of the products that we offer and the services we offer, but also around how do you drive some of this cultural change? How do you actually really do this in practice?
totally.
Um, before VMware, I was in finance for 25 years. 20 years of that was in banks. And my most recent role, I sort of ran the global middleware team for UBS. Middleware is a bit of an old-fashioned term now, I know, but I haven't found a better word for it yet. I mean, it's the
No,
thing that sits
exactly.
in
That's
the
the. I
middle.
mean, that's the problem I always have is like, yeah, I know this is an old term, but we don't have a new one yet.
Yeah, exactly. So I could make up lots of fancy names, but it's the bit that sits in the middle of the app and the operating system, right? So I ran that. And as a part of that, my team brought Tanzu into the bank, and we ran it at scale. So we obviously tried to introduce a lot of these platform as a product concepts. Having had Tanzu Labs in and to talk to us about all of that good
So, so,
stuff.
so let's well first of all, yeah. I mean, Mark just told me this morning that he moved over to your team, which is exciting. He'll be great there. He of course he's been in this, I don't know, channel of podcast video stuff at some point talking about our legacy trap stuff and the work we did there, which is always good stuff. And then you have, in addition to English, you've got German and French covered. You can do some
Well,
some
he
TV
not
and other
only
things.
increases the team by 50%, he increases the languages by 300%.
Exactly. There you go. So like let's start with like, I mean, I don't know, like what, without getting too like hung up on like the last like 6 months or so of the phrase platform engineering, and as you were calling it, platform as a product or running the platform or just running that like centralized thing that your developers use and that they run their apps on inside an organization. Like how do you think about what that is? Let's just call it the platform team. like what is what's going on there? What's the roles and responsibilities it has in the organization?
Yeah, I think so. I was at banks for a long time, and I saw things evolve from, let's say, traditionally how people did it is people tended to order infrastructure and middleware in a kind of, you would put something on a shelf. You'd say, okay, this is a web server package with some scripts around it. Off you go
Mm.
and install it, and each person would go and individually order their server and their operating system and their database and so on, right? That's how, and our job in, go back 15 years was to create these kind of generic sort of self-installable sort of pieces that really was impossible to put any standards around. It was not centrally hosted. So you were more sort of providing a product in a very kind of put it on the shelf and away you go, good luck. I think the change for when you start talking about platforms, and the concepts existed for a long time, and when people built things like web farms or shared database clusters or whatever it is, I think we just sort of added new terms to it to call it, platforms as a product or whatever. And it just means that it's that multi-tenant, someone's going to centrally own the responsibility for certain things, so the developer doesn't have to care about it, right? The developer doesn't have to order all the pieces. right? And so you worry about things like getting the base infrastructure, the capacity around it, right? How the platform is generally running, how someone consumes it, and so on, right? That for me is what it's all about. A bit like, it's having a landlord, right? Who,
Mm.
rather than you owning your own complete house. I use sort of house analogies quite a lot, by the way, so it may not be the first time we go into a house analogy, but that's the important thing for me, is that suddenly you've got experts who can concentrate on what they're good at, which is hosting, right? Which is running, whether it's Java or web apps or databases or whatever it is, providing that for you. And it started a long time ago, but then we got better at it. We had to do it originally using our own homegrown tools and just sort of sticking this stuff all together, sticking load balancers over it and stuff like that. And then, of course, we brought products along like Tanzu. And of course, now cloud does a lot of that for you as well, right? But the concept, I think, has existed for quite a long time.
And I think so one evolution of the idea of the let's call it the centralized services team, as we were joking, like I think it's a very, in a good way, a very mature, well-known thing that to go back further into history, the point of middleware is like, these are reusable common services that many different developers inside an organization use, that generally you don't want to code yourself, like a database, most famously, right? Like, or, a message bus, or it's just sort of like, I don't know, the plumbing that would be ridiculous for you to write on your own. And so generally, I guess there's three things. Like, one, you might actually write it on your own, but then it's used by everyone, right? Like it's not like every team doesn't rewrite their own stuff. Or you might use like an open source thing and you kind of like manage that and run it on their own. Or you, like, similar to that, you buy it from a vendor. And I think most, well, at least I stopped coding in 2005. So all my knowledge is based on J2EE. Right. And like,
exactly.
That was a huge stack of middleware that basically aspired to just do everything. Or, as you were saying, web service, farms or clusters, whatever. So anyways, it seems like about, I don't know, around, at least this is when I heard about things, about like 2015 or whatever, in the platform as a service days. And this is when I joined Pivotal. Like, we would talk a lot about, as a phrase you used a little while ago, like platform as a product. And I think it was that as a product that was kind of like the evolution of the centralized middleware, which is, what if we like product manage what we're providing here, which is a shift from, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, like I'm going over it to kind of validate my fanciful notions, but it seems like with the traditional way of doing middleware, your focus is more on, we're delivering some middleware or services that have to meet a set of requirements. That they need these features, and they need like this uptime, and they need this blah blah blah. But their job is to meet the needs that we have specified. Whereas the slightly but very consequently more important thing of the as a product part is, let's go find out what the developers need, and like let's continuously kind of like gather the requirements from developers by working with them, and evolve what we're doing by figuring out what makes, let's treat them as the primary customer instead of the enterprise architecture as the primary customer. I guess. I don't know. Does that seem like, is that a fair characterization?
That is absolutely what happened, because I think traditionally these platforms were just built by engineers, and it was the same people that had engineered things in a traditional way that were also providing the platforms for people to run on. I think what we did across the board, and this is not just true of middleware, we did it across the I wasn't the genius inventor of this change of approach, right? But it was done, but I was one of the implementers of it. It was that change in mindset. We changed our titles overnight from engineering leads to service and product leads, right? And that was a significant sort of mind shift. And we also started putting people into the positions that maybe the traditional engineers didn't feel comfortable doing, but it was that interface to the customer, which would typically the application owner or developers, right? I think in large organizations, when we talk about developers, actually, we talk about lots of different types of people, because there's people that are bashing out code. There's actually
Right,
people
right.
that don't actually write a line of code, but they're actually owning the applications and responsible for how the application gets, its roadmap and how it gets deployed and what infrastructure it uses. But anyway, I'm sort of digressing there on what is an app owner, right?
Sure.
But certainly in terms of the roles of those service and product managers were much more around, have you published your catalog of what you're actually offering and all the different t-shirt sizes, and
Right.
how do you consume it, right? What does it cost for the internal user to use it? Are there other options? Have you got a roadmap from where you are to where you need to be? Have you got information about what's the top priorities that you'd like us to focus on? Is it end of life? Is it compliance? And then are you running regular review sessions with your customers to find out what they want, so you can give the information two-way? And again, I'll make sure it's a two-way street, because we were often saying to the customers, by the way, we do want you to still worry about end of life and compliance and things like that, which is what I'll come on to in a minute, right? But it was them telling us, yeah, but we really need X, Y, and Z. Whereas I think you're right. In the past, it was very much probably architecture or CTO led, saying we should go to technology X and our platform should be based on Tomcat, not WebSphere, or it should
Yeah,
be
yeah.
Postgres, not Oracle, or and we changed it because of those kinds of drivers, not because we need this particular feature, we need to start introducing different ways of doing this stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, and I mean, you went through a great list there of uh like thinking about your software or whatever, the technology thing you're creating as a product, right? With roadmaps and like I in a comical but very serious way, so to speak, right? Like just publishing the catalog of services you have and making sure people can access it is often overlooked. Right? And it's just a form of marketing, basically, right? Like I remember hearing, I forget where this was or who it was, but I remember someone was talking with the infrastructure people, and they were talking with, I think this was one of our people who was talking with him, and they were saying like, oh, the developers keep asking us to like set up public cloud access. And so we need some way to do that. And then they kind of went down to the people who are providing the service, and they were like, yeah, we have that. Like, you totally have public cloud now. It's not a big deal. You can just do that. And then so the person asked them like, well, how do you do it? Because the developers don't know about it. And they're like, oh, well, you file a ticket and then we'll open it up for you. And it was kind of like, well, that's why they don't know about it, because there's not like a catalog of offerings or even worse, there is a catalog of offerings, but there wasn't enough time spent to make sure the developers knew about it, right? And I think like to kind of embellish or like add kind of a whatever to the list you were saying, like I think a couple of years ago, like the way I also started thinking about it is like, well, I've always worked for software vendors and we sell our software as a product. So I know all the activities you go through to do that. And it's kind of like, well, you just use those activities for internal IT now, which I think is a whole lot of different stuff that you add in as you were listing
Right.
there.
Yeah, I think the marketing and sort of advertising almost internally of what you do, I think is a very important thing that often gets missed with traditional engineering teams. I mean, people will tell you we have documentation, like exactly you say. It's not that they don't have something written down, but typically, I mean, and I was guilty of this when I was an engineer, right? Your documentation consisted of a Confluence page that started with a Unix command, right? It's
Yeah.
no. Well, first, you're starting down here, and that's still very important stuff that might be needed by technical people once you get into the how do I actually install this stuff. But no one really started at that bit before, saying you've already assumed that I'm inside the car and I'm asking you, I've already picked the car, I know how to drive it. Now I've got detailed instructions on how to turn the key and what the buttons do. It's like, no, step back from that. How do I even know what I want? How do I get to that Confluence page in the first place? How do I know these are the different 12 things that you're offering? And also, more importantly, how do I know that these are the ones that you want us to go that sort of order of preference,
Right.
decision trees that we then, as we got more mature, we started putting decision trees, not just here's a service catalog, do what you like. Because I think one of the dangers of cloud is there's so many services. As soon as you open it up to people, there's 27 different ways of doing it. That you don't necessarily want to do it in 27 different ways. You might want to offer 2 or 3, but you also not want to say some kind of guidance and decision tree on, if I'm doing this, then really you should take this one, right? But if you really need that, then go to this one and then that one. Not just here's the cloud, knock yourself out, right?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of like threads to pull on there, but one that I'm curious to hear, having done this, your take on is how do you make sure that you keep doing the work to make things better? like that's kind of a ridiculous question, right? But another thing that I think people encounter with, let's call it the middleware like service delivery thing, is that, especially in enterprise architectures, is it's hard to kind of like gather the feedback if the decisions you've made are the right ones, and then make sure that you go and fix it. So for example, something as simple as you were saying of like, well, we posted a page about how to use how to package your stuff up to deploy. Like that's a thrilling thing. And or like, also like how to set up a developer and a testing environment, right? Like that's a common thing to get started with. And like in the ideal state, I don't know what the period is, but like the person the team who maintained that page would go and say like, well, is this working? Right? Like, is this good? And how would we know if it's good? And maybe we should change it. Right. And then, I mean, that goes on even further that like, oh, now we need to, we found a need for developers to have a new type of service or a new type of configuration. And now we need to go do that. Right. And this is kind of like the product type is, to use a way that some people say, is like, a project ends, but a product never ends until you kill it. Right. But like, and so it seems like for us vendors, it's easy because like we want more money. So we keep paying attention to building it and we keep doing it. But it seems like when you're delivering in a project delivery mindset, like it's a new skill to learn that like we've got to go back and revisit and revise this stuff, not just sort of be done with it.
Well, I think the first, you just hit the nail on the head, which is you don't run everything just as a project, right? That's why we had to shift to sort of an ongoing concept of you own this platform or product forever. Someone once said to me, when's this done? And I said, well, never. Well, when the users don't need it anymore is the answer to when this is done, and we'll move on to something else, right? But until then it's never done. I think that's why we were encouraged, and I'll get on to how we do this, but having those reviews with the users, having internal, we used to have internal chat channels or something like that, whether it's Slack or Skype or whatever it is, right, to encourage feedback. And we had, part of that marketing side is, leave feedback on whether it's on Confluence or whatever it is, have ways of having feedback. And you can't do everything, but then work out ways of, prioritizing it. Obviously, you will have multiple customers, because you'll have different lines of business and different maybe objectives. But if they're saying, if you get multiple lines of business or customers saying the same thing, then that's a driver to improve. And then you do that by setting the goals and objectives of the team managing that platform to be that improvement. Not just deliver this project and you'll get your tick in the box at the end of your annual review. Actually, you have to set those goals at the start of the year to say, well, you're a product owner. Your goal is the following, and whether that's improvements in surveys or whether it's you have to make it up how you measure it. But it's got to be something that's measurable in terms of the platform. How many service reviews did you run? How much positive feedback did you get from those? Are your roadmaps in place for the next 3 years and always being kept? As long as you sort of people get motivated by what their goals are, right? So
that would be great.
Like, goal that's finish the project and you're done.
That'd be a great thing to contemplate at some point. Is like, what are management metrics for platform engineering and platform as a product, right? And centered around like, I mean, I think you identifying it is how do you to make a verb out of it? How do you metric size
Mm.
product delivery? And I think the I mean, as with so many metrics, right? Like whatever metrics, they're great and bad. Who knows? Just like sugar, can be terrible or it can be wonderful, right? Like just depending on what you do with it. And like it seems like there's two types you're going over there. One is like I don't know, the trailing indicators, kind of like the static things of like we had every quarter we had like a customer review meeting and we generated like a backlog from it, which is just like these are things that should be happening. It's like the blood test, right?
Yeah.
Like and but then the other thing is more trying to capture like the flow and improvement of things as far as like somehow, as you're saying, you want to capture that like yes, we're improving this, and not only are we improving it, but we're learning what's better, and it's figuring out how you capture that stuff. I'm sure is a bit of an art in some organizations of how you map it to how that organization functions. But as with most cases, it's probably pretty standard. The types of things you would start measuring, which I'm always a fan of giving like management some new metrics to do stuff because like there's only so much like work they can do beyond like meetings, setting the tone, and metrics. Like everything else is, it doesn't really scale so well. So they need the same tools or similar things.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we I think it's also about trying to tie it into actually what the end goals are, because you could have specific goals about what the platform is, right?
Yeah.
Which will be very specific to the platform. But ultimately, that's why I can't give complete examples now, because it just depends on what's the biggest driver from the customer's side, right? But if the customer is saying, what our measurement is time to market, and at the moment it's still, even with the platform, taking too long, well, then you can put a measurement around that. If it costs too much, you can put a measurement around how you can trim those costs. If it's I need more, or whatever it is, you could then put a measurement around that. The platform then becomes the enabler to those other KPIs or whatever it is that you then address. Have you improved end of life? The platform isn't going to do that on its own. You've got to sort of keep that platform getting better and better. So it then has the knock-on effect that other things in the organization are getting better, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But I think it does come from a cultural mindset. We had people come into the organization and say, you are service and product engineer managers now, right? Your job is to continually improve your platform. That is your job. Not did you create 10 Linux packages last month, right?
Yeah. You don't just do like an inventory of the assets and services created, right? Like you want to shift towards like how are you learning and adapting them to be useful, essentially. Well, so next week, speaking of the people, like we have a talk at VMware Explore in Barcelona with another set of people who've been doing this for a while. Our friends from Mercedes, the ones who run the who I think for like 7 years now have been running the Cloud Foundry instance. Started off being Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and now it's the Tanzu application service. And they've been using that as the stack, the platform for doing all this that we've been talking about. And so it's going to be great to hear from them, like what I think, what we've been trying to put together in this talk is not so much a definitional thing, but like what are the lessons learned from those 7 years, and what does it look like after 7 years, right? Which I think will be fun stuff. But as a little preview of that, the part that you're going to talk about, I think that will be great, is the people in the platform engineering team, right? Because as you and I have talked and you've commented on, like there's a lot of emphasis on the developer side of stuff, which is cool. and I think what I'm always interested in is not only how you sort of build the new role and even hire for a platform engineer on the team, but usually in a large organization, you have a lot of great skilled, good people already doing operations stuff. And like, I don't know, maybe they can move on to doing this,
Yeah.
right? And so the question becomes like, so how do you? I mean, it's hard to phrase this without it sounding like negative, but I don't mean it to be. But like, how do you just work with what you have instead of like coming up with an entirely new team and kind of motivate
Yeah.
people and train them and all of that? So what's been your experience with that? Like working with the
Well,
people that you have?
I mean, I think there's always a bit of a mix because I mean, I've seen it done badly both ways and I've seen it done well, right? I think where I've seen it done badly is either you don't bring anyone in at all. And I'm not necessarily saying that has to be new permanent members of staff, but if you don't engage some kind of consultant or vendor or someone to work with you that's done it before, I think that's a mistake. If you just try and you can, as you say, you've got some good people, but they need some guidance and steer, right? Teach them
Yeah,
to fish, kind of thing, right? I've also seen it the other way where projects have they just brought in a completely new superstar team that goes off into a lab and builds it all on their own, and they don't know anything about the organization, and they come out and go, "Ta-da! What do you reckon?" And everyone goes, "This just won't work." And it also builds resentment in the old team, saying, "Why do these guys get to work on the fancy, shiny stuff, and we're stuck doing?"
yeah,
The traditional stuff. So either of those two things don't work. I think you need a blend. You need some new people, some new ideas, and at least bringing it in from maybe places that have already done it. But I think the vast majority, as you say, you need to then all educate and train and mold your existing team to work with those new people and make them part of it, make them feel that they are part of it, not that they're being replaced, right? So that you don't end up with you're going to get a few Luddites, right? You're going to get a few, and they're probably the people that won't be working for your organization for much longer anyway, because they'll say, we've always done it like this. What's wrong with the physical server?
right, right.
It's like, it works perfectly fine, so those people, but the vast majority of people are willing to change. It's just maybe they just need a bit of a steer, right? I think the most important thing is get your own team to buy into the concept first. Right, before you start going selling it to the app teams and developers, obviously you probably need my buy-in from your manager as well. But before you start going out to wider stakeholders, you've got to try and convince your own team. And there's a few different ways of doing it. There's obviously incentives, and there's also not necessarily threats, but you've got to sort of make people realise that you've got to move on. The industry moves on, the world moves on, right? So the first thing we started with was, from an ops perspective, understanding what is now expected of an ops team. The bar has been raised, right? Dining out on uptime was something we did in the 90s and maybe early 2000s, right? But no one now says, "Oh, what was great about your iPhone?" And he went, "Oh, it worked."
Right.
No one says that anymore, right? Oh,
Yeah.
it was on 99.9% of the time. Well, it probably wasn't because of the battery, but that's a different story, right? But you see what I mean? For banks, for retail, for any of these important government, everyone just expects it. The retention. I think there was a survey, and you probably know better than I do about what the expectation now of an average user is, right? And it's less than 30 seconds. If you're
Oh, right. Yes.
down, or if it is, even if it's slow or unusable, they'll move to something else. Now, banks are a bit stickier than other organizations, particularly retail banks. We were talking about it last night, actually. So if you've got a retail app and it doesn't deliver your groceries, you'll probably switch, right? If your bank, if you can't get your balance, it's going to take quite a lot for you to uproot all of your, account and move. But if you look at younger generations, they are doing that. They are getting the new banks. So banks have also can't rest on their laurels. So it's also around understanding we have to move to survive, and within that, an operations team cannot just think the stuff that used to be important, uptime, capacity, and that sort of stuff, isn't going to cut it. Cloud gives you that out of the box, right?
Yeah.
So and if you don't want to be replaced, you need to move on and be a different sort of, you have a different mindset, get involved in some of the more interesting stuff. And let's face it, producing graphs on uptime and how much capacity is left is pretty dull as well, right?
Yeah.
whereas
Yeah.
whereas writing automation or making the platform better. That's what engineers actually want to do. So that's my next point is, traditionally in an organization that doesn't think in this mindset, you've probably got you mentioned it earlier, a ticketed approach. You've got very ad hoc requests coming your way because you haven't got a standard service catalog. Your life is probably not too happy because you get beaten over the head because you're not delivering these bespoke requirements every day, right? And in some cases, you just can't do what the customer's wanting you or asking you to do. If you move that mindset to you work on automation, you work on constant improvements, and you're making the customer happy. Well, that's a mind shift change, right? Then your day job will become happier, right? But another example was, rather than, I probably answered the same question 100 times, right? Because we hadn't got it documented, people didn't know where to go. So compare that, doing that all day long, to creating a community, creating a chat channel. The best thing ever was when a different customer answered the question that another customer put on that chat channel, and our team didn't even have to answer it, right?
You got the internal Stack Overflow effect, where you can do support by users talking with each other.
Absolutely, because I think you've probably answered that question 500 times. To me, if you've answered that question 500 times, and people used to complain about it all day long to me, saying, my day is just swamped with customer queries. And I'm like, have you written it down? Have you written down the answer? Have you pointed them at the site each time? Oh, do you see what I mean? So it's that change. But again, building that community, getting people to answer for you. Then if you want to grow, you're not just adding headcount to your team. You grow by building champions within the app teams, right? And people resonate with that. They say, you're right. I don't want to be spending time troubleshooting the same problems, answering the same questions, doing ad hoc requests all day. I want to be working on cool new stuff, right? And that's how you incentivize engineers. I think the other thing is people care about their reputation, right? I think traditionally infrastructure and ops teams are considered expensive and a bottleneck, right? That's how they're viewed by the business, a necessary evil almost, right? Which I think is grossly unfair. And what people want to do is they are, celebrated for being experts in their field. It's, and what people actually like is, oh, you've really helped me there because you really know your stuff. Yeah. You know how to use this platform. You've helped me steer my application in a way, right? And that's the kind of stuff that people actually really like. And when they start doing it and seeing it in anger, right, their daily life changes for the better, right? And I've actually seen it happen, right? Of course, you've still got some of the old stuff that you have to occasionally deal with because these organizations still have a lot of legacy, but you want people to be working in that new way. And I found that most people bought into that, right? One other area is also about, sorry, but I'm sort of in my flow now. The other area is about tying it back to some of the things that operations people do care about. I mentioned capacity and end of life and compliance, right? I think, unfortunately, infrastructure teams and operations teams have traditionally been sort of beaten up by auditors saying, you've got all this end of life, you've got lots of, stuff that isn't patched, you've got non-compliant systems, what are you going to do about it? And often the answer is, well, I can't do anything about it because it's the applications that need to make the change to either upgrade or, I can't necessarily, depends on where you are in the stack, but when it gets into sort of middle areas, I just can't upgrade the Java underneath someone, right? Without them sort of needing to test their application. I think if you can say, but if we help the developers, they can help us. Right? If you deliver a platform that's always evergreen, that's always compliant, that's always, adherent to our standards, when it comes to an audit, your life is not going to be miserable going around 1,000 servers trying to show an auditor what on earth state that server is in. So it's that sort of cyclical thing, which is what I think DevOps really should be about. It's ops helping devs help ops, yeah? And that's something that people who, even with a traditional infrastructure mindset, have bought into. I mean, we had a situation where we're talking to a customer and they didn't want to go any faster from the infrastructure side because the data center was full. And we realized that the data center's full because developers are hugging the infrastructure because they don't trust the infrastructure team to deliver the capacity when they need it.
Right.
So it gets into this cyclical problem. And we said, you do realize that if you built the trust up in the developers that the platform could deliver you what you need in a day, they would give up all the capacity that they're hugging because they might need it once a year for some, I don't know, some regulatory test that they need, and otherwise it sits completely idle, right? So it's trying to get that sort of, we all help each other, we're all wearing the same badge, we're all in the same company kind of mindset.
Right? Yeah. I remember, I mean, to highlight that, I remember us talking about that last time we talked, and I thought it was, and I still do, I think it's a great example of, like, you know, in the old DevOps Westerum thing, it's a great example, practical example of what a pathological organization is like, which is to say, you don't want to be that organization. No one is like, wakes up in the morning and says like, I'm going to put a pathological organization in place. But it's exactly like the kind of unintended negative consequences that kind of occur when both sides aren't trusting and friendly with each other, right? And it's kind of more lays on the developer side. They're hoarding these resources. It's not always the operations people, but it does turn into this vicious pathological cycle where bad things are happening. You're wasting resources because of really, like, so to speak, the culture that you have in place, like the people relation stuff, where the ops people kind of assume developers are going to be wasteful and they're not making it easy for them to get resources. And then the developers are like, I don't want to work with those ops people. They're terrible to talk with. And so I'm just going to hoard this thing and make an under the desk data center.
Right.
And like, whereas if you had a better relationship between them, both of them would benefit. I mean, it's a typical like prisoner's dilemma kind of sort of capacity stuff. But I mean, anyways, I want to point out that that's a great example of the effect of being a pathological organization.
But it's human nature as well. I mean, we saw it with COVID, how if you don't think you can get hold of pasta or toilet rolls, you buy 100. Right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with infrastructure. If you don't think you can get a VM when you need it, you order 100, and then you sit with them and then you think you can use them when you need them. And people used to do that, right? And it wasn't until we had to introduce things like, you know, monitoring usage and telling people you're 1% utilized, we are going to auto turn you off. But to counter that, we will give you free VMs for 30 days. So we gave that trust that, they knew that you didn't have to go through any approvals or anything to get a free VM for 30 days. You build that trust, and we proved that it worked. So there you go. We can give it to you if you need it on demand. Therefore, we're going to take away everything that you're not using. But you had to do the trust thing first before you got any agreement to do the auto delete thing second, right?
Yeah,
it's human nature. It's human nature. Right?
It reminds me. I mean, this is speaking of 7 years ago. Is one of the things that one of your other teammates, Tony, from the Home Depot. I remember in one of his early presentations when he was at the Home Depot going over how they were setting up this platform stuff. He was saying, I don't know, maybe it was 6-7 months into this, they had set up their platform and then developers weren't using it, you know, as much as they thought they were, which is, as you know, not cool because you still have this business case you need to make. Like if you've spent all this effort building up a platform and then 6 months later it's not being used, your spreadsheet's not going to look good as far as your business case. And you know, the idea that they had was like, well, what they found out is that people like didn't want to go through the hassle of accounting for and paying for the usage of that platform. And so they were kind of like, well, so what if they don't have to pay for it? Because like it's kind of sort of all funny money in the first place. It's all of our money. And as an organization, we benefit when developers are running on this platform. So maybe we should just remove that barrier for them to do it. And, you know, we'll sort it out later. But the important thing is to get people using it and to, you know, again, avoid that pathological thing where it's just like you're hoarding stuff because it seems because it's artificially expensive is what you want to remove.
So you're absolutely right. We went through the same sort of thing, and we did change the way we did internal cost recovery. Initially, people wanted us to have fair and transparent cost recovery based on what it really cost us to run it, which is
Right.
why the new stuff was very expensive and the old stuff was cheap, because end of life is cheap, right? Because
Oh yeah, you didn't have to load in all the upfront fees for it.
well,
Yeah.
we've already written down the servers. You're probably not paying license fees anymore because it's end of life. You've
Yeah.
probably not got any people left that know anything about it, or if you have this one guy like who spends a third of his time on it at best. So if you think the real cost of running that end of life system is the electricity, right? Now there's a
Yeah.
massive risk to it, and unfortunately, it was a concept that I touted for a while to try and put an internal sort of insurance premium, because in my early days I worked in insurance, right? To try and get the
Oh,
idea,
that's
the concept
interesting.
of
But yeah.
an insurance premium charge against an end of life server because of the risk that it then came. Because if you had an outage, the cost to the bank would be high. It never quite flew, but I at least tried to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
In the end, we did manage to get the agreement to say within your area, as you say, it's all internal money sloshing around. I then have ended up with the ability within my area to say I'm going to make the new platform cheap as chips. Right, I'm going to make it's a loss leader. It's come and stay at our hotel. The first 3 weeks is free, and then I started loading up the cost on the end of life to drive people off those platforms, even though it was artificial charging. Now it's not the only lever, because internal money doesn't completely drive people off platforms, but it's one of a few things you can do, right?
Totally. And I mean, I think at the very least, it's just like more crap you got to put up with, right? Like as a user, right? Like it's just another barrier and bottleneck to just getting on and doing the work, right? And so it's good. I mean, that's a good product way to think, is just like how quickly can someone just use this platform, and like what's all the stuff. Never mind, like even before they get to the command line or a button that they click, like what do they have to do? And then I think that almost seems like let's call it the intermediate platform team's job, is to like think about what's everything that has to happen before someone touches a keyboard, and like let's make that as easy as possible, because that's going to be the next. I mean, it seems like you're constantly trying to figure out the bottleneck and eliminate it, and get people moving along faster.
Well, and also removing things that stop people game the system because of internal reasons, like internal chargebacks, and is a fascinating topic. Wow, a hilarious topic a lot of time, because I even had the conversation where, because we hadn't managed to sort it in the early days of virtualization, internally 2 VMs cost more than one physical server. And because you were splitting up a monolith and you're often running, say, your web layer on one VM and your database on another, internally people would say, well, this is more expensive, because it looked more expensive to them because they had the same cross charge, right? But you don't want people to be doing that, because in real life, that isn't the case. It's definitely not more expensive to run 2 VMs than one physical. But, you've got to start, that's the continuous improvements you have to look at as well. What silly stuff is in the way of people using the platform, or not using the platform, rather, right? Coming up with, because, or how do you stop people gaming the system to sort of say, oh, well, your platform is more expensive because you haven't sorted out the pricing properly, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Well, this has been a good. We'll have to find some. Schedule some time to talk about all sorts of other aspects, because there's many other things, and we just kind of, I don't know, took some little digs here and there into it. Not Absolutely, in but it's and it'll be fun next week to see what we end up doing in that talk, and with the Mercedes people. But yeah, I mean, so like if people, I mean, do you have anything you want to point people to about yourself? I mean, any stuff you want to do a call to action about? What are you up to there on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, if people want to get hold of me or see what I'm liking, then obviously I'm on LinkedIn. Just be cautious of the spelling of my name, which is Darran Rice, as we discussed just before,
Yeah, yeah.
because everyone spells it wrong, or as I said to you before, maybe everyone spells it right except my parents. Uh,
Exactly.
so it's Darran Rice, okay, on LinkedIn. And I've recently also, along these sort of lines, wrote a blog around how KPIs drive behaviour, which is sort of
Right.
a classic sort of tale of how transformations can go wrong if you set the wrong behavior KPIs or OKRs. To be honest, it doesn't really matter. It's about the fact that they'll achieve something based on what their goal is, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
sure.
whether that is the right goal or not. So if that blog can be shared, that's a published Tanzu blog that I wrote. That maybe along these sort of lines would be interesting for people to read. Other than
I
that,
I, th- I think especially, I have 3 kids in the heat of becoming wonderful people, right in the middle, and it's easy to forget when you're parenting that in a corporate setting, people are generally very good at doing what you ask them to do, and as represented by metrics. So to your point, you should make sure your metrics are correct, because otherwise they'll give you exactly what you asked for, even though you didn't want it, which is good. Well, so I'll put a link to that and in the show notes we have, which you can find by going to tanzutalk.com and finding this episode in the list. And there's also I'll also put a link to. There's 2 other things. One, we mentioned platform as a product. We have a great paper that was updated, I think, last year, kind of just going over the concept of platform as a product and a little more detail on what we were talking about. And also, we have there's a great Gartner report that we licensed that goes over. I think it fits in this space. It kind of goes over the idea of an internal developer portal, which is something adjacent and overlapping to a lot of the platform stuff we were talking about. That would be another thing fun to talk about at some point, kind of narrowing down to more of the IDP backstage role in here, which I think is always fascinating to figure out what the Venn diagram is. But I think that's a great report to look through because it's very it is the style of Gartner report that is very prescriptive and lists a bunch of stuff, which I think is often useful in thinking about it. Just that, the other style, which is always nice, is just like, here's a fascinating, great new idea. Isn't it awesome? But you sometimes are left thinking about, what do I do now after that, which is totally fine. But this one has a little more practical. And with that, if you don't subscribe to the podcast, you should go to tanzutalk.com and add it into your podcast listener. Just search around in your podcast thing for Tanzu Talk and subscribe to it. I also recommend anytime you get access to someone's phone or device, whether it's family, friends, or enemies, you should subscribe them to it too, so it downloads and give them a little surprise to follow there. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
cheers.
All right. Well, that was fun. Thanks for the people who are watching here and are watching the replay. I put some of those links there in the chat thing somewhere. But yeah, if you go to tanzutalk.com, you can find links to that stuff. And I don't know if I'll be streaming anything next week, but we'll see. But I'll end the stream now, and then we'll go talk about super secret things, or just go get a sandwich.